Richard Speck, Part 2.
Wednesday, July 13th. Earlier in the evening, Louisa and Valentina gave each other manicures and reminisced about their homes in Manila, the capital city of the Philippines. As exchange student nurses, the opportunity to work and gain experience in a Chicago hospital was fortuitous, but they were undeniably homesick. Having each other, speaking their native Tagalog, and making their favorite traditional foods brought all the good feelings back. Louisa had planned to stay the night, but she instead chose to go back to her own dorm. She needed to catch up on writing letters for her boyfriend back at home. Though she may have had time to go back to Valentina's afterward, Louisa received a call from the hospital, which would ultimately save her life. She had been asked at the last minute to work the next day. Louisa walked over to Valentina's apartment to let her know in person that she decided not to spend the night. At approximately 11 p.m., Richard Speck approached number 2319 East 100th Street. He easily breached the locked back door, a skill which was second nature for him. He opened the back window with his knife, moved the screen, and reached over to unlock the door. At 6'1" and 160 pounds, this was not a difficult maneuver. Cora was a 23-year-old Filipina nurse from a village of only about 200 people. Like her fellow exchange student nurses, Cora had only lived in the U.S. for a few months. She was a petite lady, at 98 pounds and around 5 feet tall. She shared a room and bunk bed with 22-year-old Merlita, who was also from the Philippines. Cora was asleep when she was awakened by a benign knocking at her bedroom door. Nothing frantic, just 4 knocks. She got down from her top bunk to open the door. Standing there was an unknown, tall man wearing dark clothes, Richard Speck. Brandishing his knife and the stolen gun, Richard grabbed her arm and asked,
"Where are your roommates?"
Merlita arose from her bed, and the two of them were impelled to lead him to the others. He was quiet, but that gun spoke volumes on its own. Richard turned on the light to a large room where 3 nurses slept. Valentina had also been awakened. The 3 Filipina friends darted into a closet and leaned against the door to keep them in and him out. 5 long minutes passed before a quiet knock was heard.
"Come out of the closet. He's not going to hurt you."
They nervously opened the door. Patricia, Pamela, and Nina were awake now, and Richard's creepy arm was around Pamela's waist. He used the gun to gesture where he wanted them to sit, facing him, while he stood in the doorway. Though Richard couldn't hear her, downstairs Suzanne had entered to use the phone. She needed to check in to her own dorm before she missed curfew. A student took the call and marked her down. Her quick and sneaky call complete, she went back out to join her friends without anyone upstairs knowing. Richard remained calm, spoke softly, and maintained a smile.
"I want some money. How much do you have?"
Each one of them answered and stood up to get what money they had, one at a time. Richard directed their actions with his gun like a symphony conductor with their baton. When Nina asked if she could leave to get her purse, he walked all of them to her room, got the money, and walked all of them back to the original larger room, sitting in the same positions. He counted each woman with a nod of his gun. It is unknown exactly when it happened, but this is possibly the time frame when Louisa arrived at the townhouse to inform Valentina that she would not be able to spend the night. She rang the front door, the back door, and the front door again. No one answered the doors, so she left. At around 11:40, Gloria returned home after her date with her fiancé. She entered the townhouse and called her family's home to let her mom know that she was home safely, just as she did every night. Richard heard her voice. Gloria walked upstairs, a bit tipsy, and reached to open the door. But before she could turn the knob, Richard opened it and pointed his gun at her when she fearfully screamed. Maintaining his unsettling smile, Richard sat Gloria with the others and asked her for any money she had.
Don't be afraid. I'm not gonna kill you.
Richard used his knife to crudely cut strips of bedsheets. He placed each piece around his neck as he continued to cut until he had what he felt was enough. One at a time, he used a strip of bedsheet to tie each woman's wrists and one to each woman's ankles very, very tightly. He tied Pamela first.
Why are you doing this? We're student nurses.
Richard smirked. I suspect that as he calmly restrained each woman, he pictured what he would do if they were alone. He had to separate them, and he had to do it without creating pandemonium. Richard's weakness in other situations became his greatest asset that night. He had a general lack of personality. His spacey blue eyes and ordinary smile were confusing. The monster inside of him was quiet, but present. While tying Patricia, the doorbell rang. Cora and Merlita were not tied up yet, so Richard told them to answer the door as he followed them closely, gun in hand, down each step toward the front door. Cora opened the door, but no one was there. The doorbell had been rung for the back door. It had been a nurse, Tammy, who lived next door. Tammy had a sudden craving for a sandwich, but she had no bread. When no one answered, and when she looked through the window, she saw no movement inside, so she left, only feet away from Richard and his two captives, who were on the opposite side of the townhouse. Soon thereafter, another nurse, Kathy, drove by the back door to see if the ladies were awake. She'd been out on a date and asked her boyfriend to make the quick detour, in hopes of returning Nina's borrowed typewriter. However, the townhouse appeared quiet and she assumed they were asleep. It was late, so Kathy went home instead. This part of my research was possibly the most gut-wrenching part to learn. Kathy's boyfriend was a target shooter who taught her how to use a gun and insisted that she carry one for safety. She had her gun on her that night, and those who knew her said she would not have hesitated to use it if necessary. By 12:15 a.m., all 7 women were bound. Richard was completely in charge. He unbound Pamela and walked her out of the room. After just a moment, she could be heard making a sound like a loud exhale. Richard put her on the floor in a humiliating position. In the other room where the 6 women were, Gloria had passed out. The other 5 quietly but fiercely argued. Patricia and Nina wanted to keep things status quo. Stay calm, give him money, and he'll leave. They wanted to use psychological tactics they had learned in nursing school on Richard, as if he was a patient. They'd be fine if they all kept their cool. The Filipina women, Cora, Merlita, and Valentina, wanted to act. They wanted to fight or yell or attract attention to get help. Cora was certain that Richard was the same type of street thug she'd known in her home village, and begged the others to unite in a battle for their lives. They outnumbered him. They could at least have a chance to make it out of there if they all worked together. Keep in mind that this group of women were from vastly different cultures in an unforeseen, nightmarish position, both literally and figuratively. They knew they didn't have much time before Richard came back. There wasn't exactly an opportunity to weigh the pros and cons of each side, and aggressively whispering could only go so far. They had already been tied up at gunpoint. Was it too late to fight back, even if they all wanted to? Was the choice to revolt or not even really an option at that point? Then there's Richard. He knew that he was the only one who was armed, but he also understood that he was outnumbered. Just as the nurses wanted to keep Richard calm to prevent him from acting hastily, he wanted the same from them. He had to keep them calm to prevent a coup. Thursday, July 14th. At approximately 12:25 a.m., Suzanne got back home to the dorm, and with her was her close friend, Marianne. Suzanne was engaged to Marianne's brother. They'd been planning the wedding, and though she rarely spent the night away from her family home, Marianne thought it'd be fun to stay at the dorm with Suzanne that night. Another friend, Pat, had been out with them, but she wanted to stay at her own dorm instead. Suzanne and Marianne walked in the back door, up the stairs into the room where they saw Pamela on the ground, with her face entirely bound and Richard positioned over her. They ran. Richard blocked the stairs. They ran into the back room, but now they were trapped.
You two come here.
At gunpoint, they walked back to the room where Pamela was. Then they fought him with all their might, but he was prepared for this. He took the lives of both Suzanne and Marianne. It was aggressive. It was messy. When he finished, he methodically used the knife with a straight entry into Pamela's heart. She'd been a helpless target. From the other room, the bound women heard commotion. Then silence. Then running water in the bathroom. With his hands now clean, Richard returned to the bedroom to get Nina. She left the room at gunpoint, and a moment later, she was heard making a loud groan. The other bound women struggled to shuffle wherever they could to hide from Richard. It was an impossible feat, with how tightly they had been bound, only able to shift around on their stomachs. But they had to try. Cora was the only one who was able to rock back and forth like a ball in Newton's cradle, to scoot under one of the bunk beds. Then they heard the water run in the bathroom again. They knew he was coming back. Next door, Tammy, the one who had a sandwich craving earlier, heard something unusual but couldn't place what it was or where it had come from. She thought maybe it had been a very brief scream. She walked outside and looked into the dorm, where currently there were 4 nurses whose lives had been stolen, and where 5 more were in mortal danger. She couldn't see or hear anything at all. Had she imagined it? Everything seemed normal. Tammy went back inside her dorm to await a pizza that she and her roommates had ordered. Soon the pizza delivery man arrived at the wrong door. He went to number 2319 instead of number 2315. Seeing no one, he double-checked the address and went to the correct door before ringing the bell. Okay, before moving on, let's review the close encounters. That night, while a monster invaded and destroyed, Louisa went to their door, but the wrong door had been answered. Kathy had driven by while carrying a gun that she was not afraid to use. Tammy tried to borrow bread, but no one answered the door. Bread? Who borrows bread? Tammy thought she heard a scream, but saw nothing when she checked. Now a pizza delivery man went to the wrong door, but he realized his mistake before ringing the doorbell. Meanwhile, upstairs, Richard easily found the nurses who were trying to hide, except for Cora, who remained hidden under a bed. At some point, he'd lost count of the women. Richard took Valentina next. She yelled out. Soon the water ran in the bathroom sink again. Then Merlita was taken. Cora heard her shout, "It hurts!" in Tagalog, and the water ran in the bathroom sink again. Richard then went to Patricia and took her out of the room, into the bathroom. Cora could hear a loud thud as Patricia fell to the ground. The bathroom sink turned on again. Gloria was the last one left in that room, other than Cora, who remained under the bed as still as possible. Richard woke Gloria from her alcohol-induced rest, and Cora heard her ominously say,
I had a dream where my mom died.
While Cora quietly hid under one bed, Richard had Gloria on another. Cora desperately prayed as she listened to the sound of those bed springs. Richard took Gloria downstairs to continue his deranged defilement. He left her lifeless body on the couch. Why? What was the point of moving her? Was it because he was so finicky about cleanliness that he didn't want to be around the messy, bloody scene upstairs that he created? Was it a thrill for him that he was just one glance in the window away from being caught? Was he creating shock value for someone who would ultimately enter the townhouse? Knowing she was alone, but not knowing how long she'd be alone, Cora shuffled as quickly and quietly as she could move to a potentially safer hiding place. She noticed that a blanket draped down from another bed, and she'd be better concealed behind that. Richard returned to the bedroom and turned on the light so he could look around the room, while Cora lay silently praying. Stop for a moment. Imagine the level of fear you would experience if an unexpected cough, hiccup, or muscle twitch would undoubtedly be the difference between your life or your death. Think of how difficult it is to be in a soundless room, to move nothing, to barely breathe, while your racing, pounding heart feels as though it could be heard from across the street. Do you close your eyes? Or do you watch to make sure no feet are coming closer to you? Did Richard really lose track of Cora? What if he knew she was there and was waiting for the perfect moment to peek under that bed? Thankfully that didn't happen, or we'd have only speculation about what happened that terrible night. Richard left the front door wide open when he left the townhouse at around 3:30 a.m., but there was no way for Cora to know that he was gone without coming out from her hiding place. She remained tucked under that bed, silently, until she heard an alarm clock. It was 5:30 a.m. After waiting a moment, hearing nothing, Cora worked to free herself from the bedsheet bindings. A quick glance around gave her the courage to risk leaving that room. Cora was surrounded by deafening silence. She walked swiftly past Patricia, lying in a pool of blood, in the doorway of the bathroom. In her room, she found Pamela, Suzanne, and Marianne, lifeless on the ground. There was blood everywhere, so much blood. Cora climbed up to her top bunk, opened the window, pushed out the screen, and screamed for help from the ledge of their second-floor window.
How long did you scream in a sitting position with the window open?
I screamed there for about 5 minutes and nothing.
A student nurse who lived in a nearby townhouse awoke to hear Cora's shouting.
They're all dead. Everyone is dead but me.
She later said,
I believe it was 6 minutes to 6, to be precise.
Those who became aware of Cora's declaration that everyone was dead presumed that it had been a freak accident. Maybe a gas leak? But reality was far more sinister and unimaginable. When police arrived, they walked past a growing crowd into a house of horror. There was a distinct juxtaposition between people chattering outside and the ominous silence inside. What should have been another active Thursday for this house of bright-eyed nursing students was instead still, suspended in time. Detective Walenda entered the doorway to see the lifeless body of an unclothed woman on a couch. It was 22-year-old Gloria. Upstairs, he found another woman on the bathroom floor. It was 21-year-old Patricia. He recognized her. Patricia's dad had owned a tavern that Detective Walenda patronized as little Patty grew up. As he walked through the quiet townhouse, he sadly recognized others. He'd seen them during investigations which took him to the South Chicago Community Hospital, where they worked as nurses. Now he was here to investigate what happened to them. In one room, he saw 3 women, 22-year-old Merlita, 24-year-old Nina, and 24-year-old Valentina. In another room, there were 3 more women, Pamela, Marianne, and Suzanne, each only 20 years old. Marianne Jordan. Marianne had been stabbed 3 times in her chest, 1 time in her neck, and 1 time in her left eye. She was holding one of the cut strips of bedsheet. Suzanne Ferris. Suzanne lay face down in her own blood. She'd been stabbed 18 times throughout her back and neck, and was then strangled with a white nurse's stocking. Pamela Wilkening. Pamela was found on the ground, on her back. Her face was wrapped and she was gagged by a bedsheet. She was stabbed 1 time in the heart. A blanket had been tossed over the upper bodies of Pamela and Suzanne. Marianne was left uncovered. Nina Jo Schmale. Nina was on her own bed. Her legs were sprawled, and her wrists were tied behind her back. A strip of bedsheet was tied tightly around her neck. Nina's head was on her pillow, and another pillow was on top of her face. She had 3 slight stab marks on her neck, not deep enough to cause serious injury, but certainly enough to cause a lot of pain. 2 dolls were on the bed near her. Valentina Passion. Valentina was on the floor, lying on her stomach. 1 arm was under her stomach and the other was resting on her back. There was a 6-inch cut into her throat, so deep that her voice box was visible. Her head was surrounded by a large pool of her own blood. Merlita Gargulo. Merlita was on her back, across Valentina's back in an X formation. She'd been carried into the room, so Merlita's wrists and ankles were still tied with strips of bed sheets. There were 4 stab wounds in her neck, and a bed sheet had been pulled so tightly that her neck was dislocated. A blue floral blanket had been thrown across Valentina and Merlita. Patricia Matusek. Patricia was on the tile floor of the bathroom, lying on her back, with her hands still tied behind her back. A strip of bedsheet was wrapped tightly around Patricia's neck, and she had a large hemorrhage from a strong kick to her stomach. Gloria Jean Davy. Gloria was face down on the couch, with her head hanging down. Her hands were tied behind her back, with a strip of bedsheet tied tightly around her neck. Gloria was the only one who had been violated, both upstairs and downstairs. After the dormitory turned crime scene was opened to select press, a reporter wrote,
"Everything was in disarray. We found magazines and records strewn all over the floor of the living room. Lingerie and other articles of feminine clothing were tossed over chairs and in the corners of the living room. Each of the bedroom floors was bloody. A mattress was pulled off one of the beds and lay on the floor.